Hi, everybody. If you're new here, my name is Brian. I'm a science teacher, former medical student, and recovering opioid and benzo addict of 15 plus years who is currently tapering off of methadone. I run an addiction and recovery blog called the Concrete Confessional blog, and I sometimes make videos here on YouTube under the name Neuromantic or Neuromancer. So this video that I'm making today is about benzodiazepines. So it's about those drugs that are prescribed for anxiety and insomnia, like Ativan, um, Xanax, Klonopin, Valium. A lot of the chemical names end with pam. So for example, lorazepam, alprazolam, clonazepam. And as much as when I'm talking about my addiction, I emphasize my opioid addiction. And don't get me wrong, that has nearly cost me my life. I have been injecting opioids since I was 15, 16 years old. It has been on and off of them for 20 years now. It has been absolute hell trying to get off of these drugs that my system grew up being exposed to. But having said all of that, and I think this is the most impactful way I can preface what I'm going to say today. If you gave me like a gift from God and you said, Brian, you could relive your life, and I'm not going to completely free you from addiction, but you can pick one class of substances that you're not going to have to deal with this time, I would in every single timeline without hesitation say, take the benzos. Leave me addicted to opioids and take the benzos, because as bad as my opioid addiction has been, my benzo addiction has been even worse. It has made me hallucinate. It has, led almost to a psychotic state. I've had withdrawal seizures that have caused permanent problems. I have tremors from stopping them. Even a couple of years without them hasn't been enough to return my neurochemistry to normal. So permanently kind of in an agitated, nervous, hard to sleep state. And 99 out of the 100 most embarrassing, shameful, awful, wrong things that I did during my years of active addiction were done because I was on benzos. Benzos are often called alcohol in pill form. And if you're not familiar with how they act, that's not a bad way to describe their action, but it's actually a lot worse than that. Because in a certain sense, they're less sedating, so you get even sloppier without passing out, and you get this profound disinhibition. So benzos shut down the areas of your brain that normally tell you to stop, that normally rein in what you're saying, what you're doing. So you're much more liable to do dangerous things, violent things, to say things that you regret, to take just horrible chances that endanger you and the people around you. And at the same time, benzos give you this confidence. They cause you to really underestimate how intoxicated you are. So you're going to be thinking, oh, I'm fine to drive. Like, oh, I'm fine to go out and have a couple drinks on top of all these pills that I've taken, because you literally shut down the areas of your brain that are the ones that enable you to see how intoxicated you are. So benzos are the absolute worst. I cannot say that enough. If I had to be addicted to either benzos or opioids, as bad as opioids are, as far into you as they get their hooks, I would choose opioids every time. So if you guys listen to my content, you know that I struggle with spirituality. I want a relationship with a meaningful higher power, and I have a hard time getting that. But having said that, before I sat down to record this video today, I said, God, if you are listening, please give me the words so that I can prevent what happened to me from happening to someone else. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the way that benzos sort of present, the lies that they tell you when you start using them, and then what happens later on as you become dependent and addicted, and then as you realize you need to get off of them, when you realize that you're in this sort of biochemical trap that is really hard to extricate yourself from. Before I talk about that, I just wanted to say briefly, so yeah, I started taking benzos in high school. I had taken, people had given me Xanax bars recreationally a couple times. I had taken Klonopin a few times, but really it was my first year of college that I was prescribed Xanax for the first time, and I was having a lot of anxiety. I would figure out later on in life that I had an autoimmune thyroid condition called Graves' disease, where your body produces antibodies that actually stimulate your thyroid gland. And so that causes like basically a mania. It causes rapid heart rate. It causes insomnia. It causes this very severe physical anxiety. And so I didn't know I had that when I was 18. I just knew that I was way, way, way too up. And that, even after studying 12, 16, 18 hours a day, I couldn't sleep. I could never rest. I would run miles and miles. And still, I knew that I had this toxic level of agitation. And so I went to a doctor, and he said, it sounds like you've got a lot going on school-wise and in your life outside of school. And he prescribed me Xanax. And for the next several years, more time than not, I had a prescription for either Xanax, which is alprazolam, or Klonopin, which is clonazepam, from maybe a dozen different doctors. And let me tell you, not once, not a single time did any of those doctors tell me these drugs are highly dependence causing and addictive, and when you go to stop them, you're going to have severe psychiatric symptoms, including depersonalization, derealization. You're going to have psychotic symptoms. You're going to have hallucinations potentially. You could even die from withdrawal seizures, which I did end up having. Not once did they tell me any of that. It is shocking. I don't think I ever had a consultation with a doctor when I was, and don't get me wrong, I was asking for these medications, where the doctors actually reviewed all the potential short-term and long-term side effects with me. Never once did a physician tell me the biochemical trap that I'm going to tell you about today. So this is a huge abdication of responsibility on the part of our medical system. And I wish I could tell you that there's a very complicated, very a solution or a description of why this happened that involves a lot of goodwill put in the wrong direction and that kind of thing. And the truth is, there's a very short explanation of why benzos have been so overprescribed and why so many people have been hurt by them. And the answer is simply money and greed. In the US, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that regulates new prescription medications, it is run by the same people. There's a revolving door between industry and regulatory positions. So the same people that are heading the big pharma companies that make these drugs are the ones who end up in government positions, deciding which drugs are approved and what kind of warnings go along with those drugs, and evaluating the studies that show whether these drugs are useful or not. And by the way, those studies are virtually all sponsored by the companies that are developing the drugs. So there is a huge incentive to state the benefits and to underemphasize all of the cons. So until we reform the FDA in the US, we are going to have more disasters like Purdue and OxyContin, and like we had with the benzos. And if you look at the list of the most profitable pharmaceutical products in the United States and internationally, you will see that, out of the top 10 or 20, several are benzodiazepines. You'll see Valium, which is diazepam. You'll see Klonopin, which is clonazepam. You will see Xanax, alprazolam. You'll see lorazepam, which is Ativan. These are some of the original blockbuster medications. These are some of the first drugs in the 60s and 70s and beyond to generate billions in profits, and partly because people tend to be on them in the long term, and partly because people are so desperate for relief from this stimulus bombardment that we get in modern society. They are just gold mines. They're pharmacologic gold mines. And again, the people who should be gatekeeping and warning against us against the dangers of these medications, our psychiatrists and our pharmacists. They are sold out to the interests that are making unbelievable amounts of money from pushing these medications. And what we saw with the benzos, even more so than the prescription opioids, okay, we saw that benzos were marketed as mother's little helpers kind of medications. We saw benzos were marketed as a lifestyle thing, better living through modern chemistry. You're a bored suburban housewife and your kids are at school for the day, you're done with your cleaning, you're kind of, you got some time to chill out, well, pop a Valium, or you're a guy who's climbing the corporate ladder, you're working 12-hour days, you're coming home, you want to be able to get your mind off work and relax with your kids and your wife and enjoy their company. Well, in the same way you might have, before this had a cocktail or two, well, now you can pop a Valium or a Xanax. Like, there was very much this cultural push to glorify these drugs and to normalize taking them to put up with a frenetically paced society. And these days, it's not about, sort of like smoothing the rough edges of achieving the American dream. These days, it's about just keeping our heads above water. 42% of Americans have some medical debt. We are all one major illness away from bankruptcy and losing our homes if we have one. Almost all of us are living paycheck to paycheck. Even the educated middle and upper middle class are living paycheck to paycheck. So instead of saying this is not tenable, we need national health care, we need worker protections, we need to hold some of the people pushing this hustle culture accountable. Instead, we're saying, let's just medicate ourselves into oblivion. Let's push ourselves from 0 to 60 all day and then come home and take downers to help us de-stress, unwind, and sleep. So one of the reasons that benzos have become so entrenched in our psychiatric system is because of this cultural push to normalize them. But getting a little bit ahead of myself, and I want to talk about what happens, okay? So oftentimes, you will actually get your first benzo, even though it's illegal, from a friend or family member. You'll tell one of your friends or maybe your auntie or your uncle, I can't sleep. I'm going through marriage problems. One of my kids is having some difficulty. I'm so stressed out. I'm having trouble getting my mind off of it. And someone says, hey, I take this medication from time to time. They give you a Xanax or a Klonopin, or maybe you go to your doctor. You tell them that you got some pretty severe situational stress. Again, maybe you're having trouble sleeping, and you got an old school GP or family care doc who doesn't necessarily know a lot of these medications, but they hear your pain. They want to give you something that works right away. So they don't want to say prescribe you an SSRI that's going to take 6 to 8 weeks to work, if it ever does, helping your anxiety, right? So they say, we're going to give you a benzo. And two things are going to happen. Maybe you find out that your anxiety was, in a certain sense, not that bad. Maybe you take your first 0.5 milligrams of Xanax, of alprazolam, and you find like, wow, it just kind of makes me fuzzy. It makes me muddy-headed. I don't like it. Maybe you feel kind of tired, and in that case, you dodged a bullet. But what's more likely, especially if you get that physical flight, fight, freeze type of anxiety, that heart racing kind of anxiety, that anxiety that keeps you awake, eyes wide open in terror at night, thinking about all the negative possibilities from whatever situation you're perseverating on. If you have that kind of anxiety, that very adrenergic, that adrenaline-fueled anxiety, these medications are going to be like if you closed your eyes before you went to your doctor and prayed to God that he would give you something to help you because you could not take the anxiety and the sleeplessness anymore. These drugs are going to seem like the answer to your prayer. They are going to not just smooth the edge, even at a pretty low dosage, again, maybe 0.5 or 1 milligram of Xanax, the edge is going to disappear. You are going to be so present in the moment. You're going to be able to sit with your partner, with your kids, give all of your attention to them for what feels like the first time in forever. You're going to be able to put those thoughts about, the mortgage refinancing, about your kids struggling in school or being bullied, about your own sort of dissatisfactions and relationship worries. You're going to be able to push all of those aside and just be present and serene in the moment. And you are going to thank God for this medication. Okay, so this is stage 1, where you meet your benzo of choice, and it is the honeymoon. It is better than you could have ever anticipated it being. And again, especially if you get that kind of physical anxiety, you're not going to feel super messed up or messed up at all. You're just going to feel evened out. You are not going to feel over the top, like sloppy, like if you had a bunch of drinks or something. It's going to feel very targeted and smooth relative to if you were, for example, using alcohol to try to get that anxiolysis, that anxiety relief. Okay, so that is stage 1. It's the honeymoon. Now, once you have that shortcut, yeah, we all know that we should avoid caffeine. We all know that we should get enough rest. We all know that we should eat a more balanced diet and avoid, simple carbs and sugars that can sort of exacerbate anxiety. We all know those things, but once you've got that magic bullet, you're going to want to keep that weapon in your arsenal, right? It's going to be very, very hard to say, okay, I have something that works perfectly, better than I ever could have expected or hoped, and I'm just never going to take that again, right? Very few people can do that, especially, again, if you have true severe anxiety. So now we are in stage 2. And depending on your own physiology, your own life circumstances, depending on which medication you're taking and at what dosage, it can last as short as, a month, a few weeks. It might last, if you're lucky, 6 months to a year. Probably if you really rein it in, you don't take it too frequently, and you're low on the dosage end of the spectrum, you might make it a year and a half or 2 years. But in this phase 2, the honeymoon starts to end in, please listen to me when I say you will not know it until it's too late. This is what's going to happen. You are going to suddenly feel a few weeks or months in, my anxiety is so bad. My anxiety has never been so bad. Whatever symptoms you've been having, whether it's a panic attack, a full-on panic attack, or just sort of perseverating where your mind is, you have these intrusive thoughts about whatever is giving you anxiety and you just cannot get them out of your head and you're awake all night with these symptoms. Whatever you are having anxiety symptom-wise is going to be worse. And you're going to go to your doctor and you're going to say, thank God for my benzo. Thank God for my Xanax. I don't think I could do my life right now without it, okay? And you're going to say, I'm so glad that we found this. And your doctor is going to look at you. Your doctor is going to say, hey, the patient knows him or herself best. He or she is telling me that this benzo is saving their life. They're obviously tolerating it well, right? I can tell that it's helping them. So, all right, we can go up on the dosage a little bit. We can get you through this period of increased stress. Yes, I'm going to encourage you to try lifestyle changes that will decrease your anxiety. Yes, I might refer you to a therapist if I'm a good doctor, which most doctors aren't, frankly. I'm going to refer you to someone you can do cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy, mindfulness exercises with. But in the meantime, we're going to keep you on the benzo, and often we're even going to increase the dose a little bit, okay? Now, what's going to be happening, if you could zoom in and look at what's happening in your brain cells during this time, you would see, okay, so just to back up a little bit right now, every system in your body is engineered to maintain balance, what we call homeostasis. That means against changing external conditions, against changing environmental conditions, and changing internal conditions in our own bodies, our systems are all engineered to keep a dynamic equilibrium, a balance, okay? So that we can sort of regulate ourselves and prevent these big changes in physiological parameters that would throw us off balance and make us non-functional. So your body is seeing, okay, I'm taking in this pretty potent sedative. I'm taking in this drug that boosts the levels of GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is a neurotransmitter. It's kind of like the brakes of the central nervous system. It's a calming neurotransmitter, and that's what benzos act on. They act on the GABA-A receptors. So your body sees this, and it needs to sort of restore balance. It doesn't want you sedated. It wants you awake. When your body feels that you're in flight or fight, you're in that state for a reason. It needs to keep you alert, right? Those impulses evolved over hundreds of millions of years of evolution so that when we're under attack, when we're in danger, we're at our most alert. And yet that feeling of hyper-awareness is uncomfortable, but it serves a function, right? So your body sees you're taking in this powerful sedative, and it does two things. The first thing is it mitigates the effect of that sedative, that downer on your body. And it does that, again, if you could zoom in on your nerve cells, what you would see is that the number of GABA-A receptors that the benzos bind to and stimulate goes down. Your body downregulates the receptors. So even if you're taking the drug, there are just fewer receptors for it to bind to and exert its action through. The other thing that happens are things like receptor uncoupling, where, the drug might bind to the receptor, but that set of cellular changes that exerts the effect is less likely to occur because of changes that at the cellular level sort of like unhook some of the machinery that has to activate in sequence for the benzo to have its effect. So your body decreases its sensitivity to the benzos, and at the same time, it sort of manufactures a stimulant. There's another neurotransmitter called glutamate. And this is sort of a natural stimulant. It's sort of the accelerant or the gas pedal of your central nervous system. And what your body does is it turns up the glutamate to counterbalance the fact that you're taking in a very powerful benzo that is boosting GABA, again, that inhibitory neurotransmitter. So what this means is you think your anxiety is getting worse and the benzo is helping. The benzo is creating the increased anxiety. You're building up tolerance to it, so it's having less of an effect, and you're feeling more more of that glutamate boost and not as much of the inhibitory GABA push. You are also feeling more interdose withdrawal. That means these drugs, benzos, have a very wide range depending on the agent of how long they act for. They can act for as short as like from 2 to 4 hours to as long as maybe like 6 to 8 hours. But what happens is you take your dose and maybe you take it twice per day, 3 times per day, and in between you get this spike in horrible anxiety, you know, and you find maybe you take a benzo to go to sleep, but 2-3 hours later you're awake panicking, and that is interdose withdrawal. You're not only getting tolerance to the drug, but in between doses you are feeling that that upregulation of the excitatory neurotransmitter, okay, of glutamate. So what's happened is you think the benzo is helping your anxiety, and that your anxiety is just maybe because of some situational stress or whatever you tell yourself. You think the benzo is saving you, when in fact the benzo is driving the anxiety. If you didn't have messed up neurophysiology to begin with, the one guarantee of taking benzos is that you will end up with messed up neurophysiology. If you didn't have physiological generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder to begin with, when you are done with benzos, you will have it, okay, because of this disruption in these neurotransmitter levels with GABA and glutamate that I'm talking about. So this is stage 2. This is the thank God for my Xanax stage. This is, I don't think I could do life without Xanax, doctor. My anxiety is so much worse even than when I first saw you, and this is the only thing that helps. And it takes a really good, almost no family practitioner is going to recognize this, okay? But even psychiatrists, it takes a really good psychiatrist, A, to recognize this stage before it's too late, you get into stage 3, and B, to care enough to go down the long road of getting you maybe on a better, safer medication that's going to take longer to work and that will come with its own side effects, or even better yet, to do actual therapy with you, to teach you concrete, non-medication based coping skills with CBT and DBT and mindfulness so that you don't rely on a medication at all. And guess what? Insurance does not incentivize them to do that. Insurance won't pay for an MD to sit down with you and teach you those exercises, okay? It's just, it's all about the script writing in modern psychiatry. And again, that is such an abdication of the responsibility of the physician. It is such a betrayal of the Hippocratic Oath. I cannot say enough what a public health disaster American psychiatry has ushered into our country. But before I get too off track, okay, so that's stage 2. It's thank God I have this medication. Nothing else is working. Now in stage 3, more of the same, okay? Your body is still trying to maintain homeostasis, but your tolerance is too high, and you have a paradoxical effect now. The first thing you're going to recognize is I'm getting sloppy, okay? The memory loss that benzos are famous for starts to kick in. You start having, maybe you order things online that you don't remember ordering. You have conversations with people that are fuzzy around the edges. You start getting hit harder by the benzo, partly because of long-term neurologic changes that accompany benzo use, which we're still learning more about now. You also sort of, on top of that, it's hitting you harder. You're not getting the effects you want anymore. You just, even though you're taking a higher dose, you cannot get that calming effect. You cannot get that sleep effect. Your body is just too tolerant to it. So you're at the one hand becoming sloppier, and it's more obvious that you're impaired. And on the other hand, you are just not getting the effect that you need from it, which encourages you to up your dose even more. And if you have a crappy doctor, more often than not, they're going to get you toward the high end of what is legally allowed in terms of the dosage they can give you per day. They might add a second benzo into the regimen. They might add a Z drug like Ambien or Sonata or Lunesta. Those are a different, structurally a different class of chemicals, but they work in virtually the same way at the same GABA A receptor. So your doctor might mix in another agent. You are likely to start mixing in another agent. One night you'll go to dinner, you'll have a glass of wine, you'll come home and you'll take your Xanax and you'll be like, oh, like bam, this is how it used to feel. This is what I'm chasing after. You realize, even though you know there's a warning on the bottle, you shouldn't drink with it. It's like, all right, but one glass of wine plus a pill gets me where I need to be. Well, what happens? You wake up the next morning, you're taking higher dosages, you're still groggy. Well, you need something to wake you up. Maybe it's a latte, maybe it's 5 Hour Energy, or maybe you've already got your toes in the controlled substances world. So maybe you get a prescription for Adderall or something like that, and you start essentially speedballing, trying to do for your body what it should do for you and maintaining your balance. And at that point, you just become totally non-functional. Guys, people ruin their lives on these drugs. If they're privileged enough that they don't really have to work or have a lot of responsibilities, they just kind of become recluses. They try to hide from their friends and family how dysfunctional they are a lot of the time. But for people with jobs, they often get pulled over, on their way to work because they're impaired. And by the way, just because you have a prescription for a benzo, if you are judged to be driving unsafely, it doesn't matter that you have a prescription. That is still a DUI, DWI, so you might get involved in the court system. There is a whole class of legal defenses called the Xanax defense or the Ambien defense for everything from drunk driving to murder. The idea is that the amnesia, the memory loss that these drugs cause is so incredibly profound that you might have committed a crime you don't even remember, that you're not responsible for. So that is how much these drugs affect your behavior. And again, in this final stage, you are getting all of the bad effects and almost none of the good. You're still chasing those good effects and you just can't hit that happy point anymore. Your brain has changed. You've got longer term brain damage now. Some of the structures that allow you to remain functional on these substances have been eroded by prolonged use of benzos. Now you also, and mark my words, you are going to think you're physically ill. If you go to Benzo Buddies or another site for people tapering off of benzos, you will see very, very common. People are diagnosed with autoimmune conditions, everything from lupus to Hashimoto's. They are diagnosed with IBS and Crohn's and colitis and all kinds of other GI syndromes. They are diagnosed with all kinds of neurologic conditions that are rare and that aren't related to taking in a medication because something is wrong with your body. These benzos are incredibly powerful medications that through your central nervous system affect every single system in your body. So you start having all these weird physical symptoms and your mind is interpreting them differently. So two of the main benzo withdrawal symptoms are depersonalization and derealization. They make you kind of psychotic. They give you a very strange, surreal relationship with your own identity, with your body parts. Everything feels odd. So even if you don't have something going on physically, which you probably do caused by these drugs, you're going to think you do because you feel so weird. And you're likely to go through a whole circuit of specialists who believe you. They look at your scripts. They don't think twice because they're in their own little wheelhouse. They don't think twice about seeing a commonly prescribed benzo on your prescription list and considering that it could be causing this. So during this final stage, stage 3, you're getting sloppy. You can't get the effects you want anymore. Your dosage continues to go up and you're still not getting that anxiety relief and that insomnia relief. So you're maybe mixing it with other downers. You're starting to take uppers to counteract the sedation, and you are going to the doctor and telling your doctor, I am so sick. How could I stop the benzos now or back off the benzos now? Because there's something else wrong with me. I've got a physical illness at this point. And again, just if you don't believe me, read the stories. Go to Benzo Buddies or any forum where people talk about coming off of benzos. It is incredibly common that they're falsely diagnosed with an autoimmune condition or any of the other syndromes and diseases that I've mentioned. It's crazy how common it is. There's more awareness of it now among doctors, but it is still something that's very much only the really good, really sort of on the cutting edge psychiatrists know to look out for. And again, if you're like a rheumatologist, you're not going to know this. There's almost no chance that you know this, and then unless you happen to have had a patient who went through it and who came back and told you about it afterward, and you were a good enough doctor to listen and to actually go against some of what Big Pharma has told you about the safety of these medications. So stage 3, you're a mess. In this phase, you might start having withdrawal seizures. So instead of just interdose anxiety, you are going to have actual seizures. And guys, I have had more than, probably a dozen seizures from benzo withdrawal, and you don't come back from a grand mal seizure fully. They can kill you. You can go into an uninterrupted seizure called status epilepticus and never come out of it. So that's very rare. But even though it's rare that you die from the benzo withdrawal seizures, they cause permanent brain damage. And even if you don't have the seizures, there are long-term cognitive and so changes to your memory, your thinking, your emotions, We are starting to see what we think is a higher risk of Alzheimer's and other types of dementia in people who take benzos long term, even at therapeutic dosages. So there are all kinds of long-term neurologic changes that come with the benzos. And so you are probably at this point, you might have a hard time admitting it to yourself. You might be in denial, but you're probably realizing, like, the benzos have something to do with it. You do some research online, you hear other people's stories, you realize, I need to get off of this stuff. And you have a doctor who, again, probably shouldn't have been prescribing you these in the first place, probably didn't walk you through fully informed consent, and he tells you, oh, you can just stop taking them, right? Or you can just do a quick taper of a week or two. You do that, and you are out of your mind with anxiety. Again, you're hallucinating. You are not sleeping at all. You feel like you are going crazy because you are going crazy. You are neurobiologically insane because of what the benzos have done to your physiology. You are now in glutamate, what we call excitotoxicity. There's so much of that gas pedal, that glutamate neurotransmitter, that your brain is it's damaged by it. It is actually a toxic state in which oxidative damage permanently, potentially, hits your nervous system. So, you gotta, the moral of the story is there is a way out at this point. Okay, you gotta find a doctor who is knowledgeable with tapering off of benzos. There's a British psychiatrist who devoted her life to this. In her manual for tapering off of benzos, it's called the Ashton method, and I'll link it below this video. It's available free online. Basically, you transfer over to a longer half-life benzo so you can get a steady plasma concentration in over months, maybe even a couple years. You steadily decrease off so that your body can, stepwise, go down a little bit, adjust a little bit, go down a little bit more, adjust a little bit more. And it's not this big radical change that causes all the damage, the seizures, the memory loss, and everything else, okay? So the Ashton method is what you want to do. It has a really high success rate. Again, it decreases the neurological damage from this tapering process. And I cannot tell you enough, this woman revolutionized our knowledge of how bad benzos are, and B, our knowledge of how to get off of benzos with minimal damage to mind and body. And again, there are groups like Benzo Buddies, which I'll also link, support groups for people getting off of benzos. There will be people available 24/7 to take your call and read the stories, guys. If there's one takeaway from this video, go on Benzo Buddies or another website and read about people coming off of benzos, read about all the physical misdiagnoses, read about the times when they literally, people crawling to the phone, crawling to the bathroom because they feel like they are dying. Their heart rate is through the roof. I mean, they can't even do basic tasks sometimes for years. It can take 2 years to get back to whatever your new normal is going to be after you stop taking benzos, especially at high dosages, especially for longer term. All right, so you can get out of stage 3, but you've got to be honest with yourself about where you are. You've got to find a knowledgeable clinician to help you, and you got to use the Ashton method. So please, if you know someone who is considering taking benzos, who's currently taking them and maybe is or isn't showing alarming symptoms, please tell them the only safe way to take these drugs is PRN as needed, maybe once or twice a month. And you never want to take them. If you're taking them daily, never ever take them for more than 7 to 10 days, So the FDA has issued a warning to that effect. That's not me saying this. This is the FDA now acknowledging this. For drugs like lorazepam, which is trade name Ativan, we know now that even taking it for 7 to 10 days in a row, when you stop, you get rebound anxiety and insomnia. What that means is not just the anxiety and insomnia that you had before come back. What that means is stopping the drug actually, because of that glutamate upregulation that I talked about and the other physiological mechanisms through which your body is trying to compensate for the action of the drug and oppose it. Because of those changes, you get an increase relative to where you started anxiety and insomnia wise. You get an increase in your symptoms after only 7 to 10 days of using an agent like lorazepam. So please, these drugs are some of the most dangerous drugs out there. They are every bit as scary and potentially lethal as opioids, as amphetamines, as cocaine, or any other street drug you could imagine. So please watch out. We need to get the word out about benzos. I did my best in making this video, and really all you guys can do if you want to help is like, comment, but even more than that, talk to the people in your life who might be considering taking benzos or taking benzos now. We cannot trust our current public health infrastructure to tell us the truth, because the truth is that they have been bought out by big pharma, so we need to tell each other the truth. So thank you all for listening, and I will respond to any questions in the comments below. And again, I will link Heather Ashton's guide, and I will link Benzo Buddies.